Hello there, friends and enemies. Welcome back to Keyforge is a unique card game created by Richard Garfield, creator of Magic the Gathering. Keyforge is unique in the way that every single deck that you buy is going to be a different combination of cards. No two decks are ever going to be the same. Keyforge has a bunch of interesting game mechanics, and it's a really interesting card game that a lot of players get into, so without further ado, let's start talking about the cards. Keyforge can be bought in individually packaged 37 cards decks. So the first card of each deck that you'll most likely see is your identity card. This will identify the houses that your deck is made out of and the archon that runs your deck. We'll go ahead and talk about the identity card later and what its use in gameplay is. Each deck is made up of to 4 different types of cards. We have action cards, creatures, artifacts, and upgrades. Each card will have its name and the identification of its type either on the top of the card for artifacts and upgrades, or on the middle of the card for creatures and actions. Up in the left-hand corner of each card is its house icon. This identifies what house each card is linked to. We'll talk about how different houses come into play when we move on to gameplay. Some cards might have a bonus icon under their house icon. These bonus icons do different things depending on which icon you get. An amber icon gives you 1 amber, a capture icon lets you capture an amber from an opponent, a draw icon lets you draw, and a damage icon lets you deal damage to another creature. Lastly, on creature cards, each creature gets a power value and an armor value. If the armor value is a little squiggle, that means that that creature has no armor, but any number means that that is the amount that is prevented when damage is dealt to that creature. The power of a creature deals as both its attacking power and its life value. Now we'll go ahead and talk about that a little more in just a second, and since we're done with all the cards, we'll move on to gameplay right now. Here we have our Keyforge board set up. We start with our deck, our identity card, 3 unforged key tokens, and a plethora of other tokens that we can use to keep track of our resources. The player going first will draw 7 cards into their hand, and the player going second will draw 6 cards into their hand. If we're going first, we'll start at step 2, where we identify our house. In this step, we take a look at our identity card and choose one of the 3 houses on the card. This choice will determine what type of cards we get to play in our hand or use throughout the rest of our turn. Next, we get to play, discard, or use any cards from the active house. For this turn, I've picked my dis house, so I can play any of the 2 discards that are in my hand. Since I'm going first, I can only play or discard 1 card from my chosen house. For this turn, I'll bring in my Eterome creature. Now, when creatures or artifacts enter the field, they come in exhausted. However, if we wanted to this turn, we could also discard our Eterome if we felt like it wasn't going to give us anything this turn. For now though, we're just going to keep Eterome in play. Since creatures and artifacts come in exhausted, this means that they cannot be used during the turn that they're entered into play. Now, we could have also chosen to play Exhume this turn if we had a monster in our discard pile. If we were able to play Exhume, it does have an amber symbol under its house identification. If we were to play Exhume, this amber symbol would allow us 1 amber from our amber pile. We'll leave this amber token on the field to talk about a little bit later. During step 3, any active creatures can choose to use their ability if they have one. Any creature can also be used to reap. Reaping requires you to exhaust a readied creature and then take an amber token from the reserve. If the creature has a reap ability, this gets put into effect after getting the amber token. A player could also choose to play an artifact on their turn, bringing it in exhausted. When artifacts are in play and are readied, they stay on the field and have a once per turn action to them normally. A player can also choose to play an upgrade card. When an upgrade card is played, a player chooses an existing creature on the field and attaches that upgrade card to the creature, giving that creature an upgraded effect. When a creature that an upgrade is equipped to is sent to the discard pile, that upgrade also gets sent to the discard pile. Some cards may have an ability on them that says play. This ability activates the moment that this card is played onto the field. During step 3, we can also choose to use our cards to fight if we have a creature. When fighting, the active player chooses one of their creatures to fight one of an opponent's creatures. When these two creatures fight, they will deal their power to each other's power as damage. If a creature has an armor value, that armor value prevents that creature from taking that amount of damage. After we've done everything we can in step 3, we'll enter step 4 where we can ready all of our exhausted cards. Moving on to the final stage, if we have less than 6 cards in our hand, we can draw cards from the top of our deck until we have 6 cards total in our hand. Once it comes back around to our turn, we'll enter step 1 where we're able to forge a key. This is where the Amber token comes in. If we enter our turn with 6 Amber tokens in our reserve, we are forced to spend them all in order to forge a key. From here, whether or not we forge a key, we can move on to stage 2 where we identify a house again. A player wins the game if they are able to forge all 3 keys. So there we have Keyforge. Definitely an interesting and unique game, but how do I personally feel about this? First, let's start off with the price. Keyforge decks are not crazy expensive. Regular decks are around $10, you can get double decks for about $20, and I think special boxes come at around $20 to $30, depending on what type of special box you get. Overall, not a very expensive card game. Of course, you won't get any of the tokens unless you get a double deck or a special box, but the tokens aren't really necessary for the game. You can represent all of the game's tokens using other things. That being said, when it comes to this game, it has a lot of moving parts, which I can see being definitely frustrating when it comes to gameplay. Though I've never played the game, and as interesting as the game is, I can definitely see all of the stuff that you have to keep track of kind of getting lost and muddled. You might have to have a rule sheet on hand just to make sure you're always reminding yourself of how things work. Although Keyforge doesn't seem to have as many things to keep track of as most card games, so it's kind of a mixed bag here. It seems like a lot, but at the same time, I can acknowledge that it's not really all that much. However, I do think the concept of choosing a house of cards that you can play at the beginning of each turn might make the game a little more frustrating along with all of the other stuff that you have to take care of. While it seems like a cool concept to have cards be not active during certain turns if you decide that you need to play other cards, it definitely seems like it could hold the game back quite a bit. I could see that possibly this could make a game one-sided if one person is drawing into a bunch of one house and the other person is drawing into a bunch of different houses and not getting a good hand. Which is a risk that's run with every card game when it comes to drawing, but in this card game it seems a little more unnecessary, in my opinion. Not to mention that the game has other advanced concepts that it introduces into the game that you can introduce if you're, a high-level player that I think would make the game a little more complicated on top of everything you're already doing. Which, again, I can't stress enough, isn't as much as other card games, but still seems like a lot from a gameplay standpoint. Now, I don't want to make it sound like this game is a bad game because, as I said before, I haven't played. I can't fairly judge it based on its gameplay, but it just seems like the gameplay can get very muddied a lot. Stepping away from that, if you'd like to get into Keyforge or at least try it out, but you don't have the money or you don't want to spend the money on it, there is an online client in Crucible Online. I'll go ahead and link down below if you'd like to test out the game for yourself. It does seem like you are required to create an account in order to play a game, but that's not far from the realm of other online clients for card games. And as far as I'm aware, Keyforge is currently on a hiatus due to some unforeseen technical problems with their algorithm when it comes to building their decks. So as of right now, getting old Keyforge decks shouldn't be that complicated, and getting new Keyforge decks isn't really possible. All that compounded together, taking a look at the game itself, I would rate it a 6 out of 10. Part of me thinks that this game could be boring and not fun and frustrating, but part of me also thinks that this game might have a new life to it. However, I don't have the ability to play with friends here, and I'm not the biggest on playing an online client for a game that I'm not sure about, if I'm honest. So there is Keyforge. Tell me your thoughts on Keyforge. I don't like to push any of my opinions about the game out as fact, especially when it's a game that I haven't played before. So I'd like to know how you feel about the game. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that the video was at least somewhat enjoyable for you and informative. And until next time, drink your water.